So the first group of players that we want to talk about is who we're going to be keeping an eye on, incoming freshmen.
Yeah.
So there's 14 early enrollee freshmen, if my numbers are correct, Brian. And we each picked 3 that we're going to be keeping our eye on, in the 3-minute videos. But we're going to be looking for and talking to our sources and things of that nature. So 3 freshmen that have an opportunity to make a splash in whatever that definition is. We each pick 3 and we're going to kind of go with it. So do you want me to go first or you want to go first?
Go ahead and kick it off. I mean,
okay.
you're the lead. And this is a good one because we didn't pick the same guys. So we kind of each picked our 3 and then we compared notes. So, a lot of these are going to be 3s, and 3s. So this is more of the top 3. There's more than 3 freshmen.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to see this spring, but we had to narrow it down so that way each topic wasn't an hour. We had to narrow it down to 3. So so go ahead and kick it off, Vince, and with your guy, because I think we've already talked a little bit about him.
We have, and so we don't need to go super in depth. I took the easy one. I took the softball. I took Tyler Buckner because we have heard about Tyler Buckner for 3 years now, for the most part, and now we get to see him in a gold helmet. We get to see him, in the blue and gold, and it is going to be just because. And I think one of the main reasons is I'm not anticipating him winning the starting job or anything like that. That is not why I have selected him. I selected him because he hasn't played football in over a year. And there's only so many drills you can do. There's only so many brooms you can throw over. There's only, you know what I mean? There's it's not real football. And I'm not saying spring is real football, but you've got the pads on. You got the red
It's real
jersey.
football. It's not game football, but it's real football.
It's not drill work all the time.
You can get tackled. You have 5 offensive linemen in front of you. You have 11 defensive players trying to stop you, and you don't know what play they're calling.
Exactly.
It's the first time he's not in a controlled environment.
Correct.
And I don't care what you do in a drill. You can make it as chaotic as what, but it's still a controlled environment.
It's exactly
right.
And
practice is to a degree a controlled environment, but to a much greater degree, there's less control because you can't control and dictate what the other side of the ball is doing.
Right. And I am excited to see what he can do against better competition. I mean, he did take it upon himself and transfer to a school for his senior year that was going to be better competition, the whole thing. And I applaud him for that because he absolutely dominated as a junior against lower competition. And then everything with COVID happened. And so he didn't even get that opportunity. So this is going to be the first chance that he's going to be able to go up against dudes. I mean, and I would be paying attention to number 12 in red. There is no question. He would be like, okay, where's the Buckner kid? I need to pick him out. I want to keep an eye on him. He would be the number 1 guy that I'd be looking for.
Vince, with Tyler Buckner, there's always this thing of, well, we don't know what it's like, what he's going to be like playing against better competition. And that's fine. You'd say that about any high school kid because every high school kid. The thing that I'll say is, well, what's he going to be like when he's throwing to Braden Lindsay?
Yeah.
And Michael Mayer and Avery Davis and Jordan Johnson and Xavier. I mean, handing off to Kyron Williams. He wasn't exactly playing with world beaters either. It's not like, when Jimmy Clausen was coming out, Jimmy Clausen was playing with like Chris Owusu, who went to Stanford and was a big time player.
Right.
Yeah. So I think it wasn't Jimmy Clausen's running back, Mark Tyler or Mac Tyler, who went to USC and was a pretty good player. Right. So this isn't a kid who necessarily was surrounded by big time players either. And it'll limit you a little bit as a passer when your receivers are running 4.9s compared to, Braden Lindsay, who's running a 4.4, or Jordan Johnson, who's an elite player, or Xavier Watts or Avery Davis or whatever. Then you don't always have to be as perfect either. I mean, I watched some game film with Tyler Buckner where he would miss on a long throw, and I'm thinking, man, if he's throwing to Michael Mayer, if he's throwing to Xavier Watts, man, that's a touchdown.
Right.
So I think that is something that we aren't talking about enough either. Yeah, he's got to learn to face big time competition, but this is going to be the first time Tyler Buckner's kind of going into battle with dudes that are on his level.
Sure.
As not just against him, but with
for him. Yeah, exactly.
And that's a big part that I'm excited about as well.
So who's your number 1 guy, Brian?
My number 1 guy is Ryan Barnes. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Number 1, with really 3 reasons. Number 1 is the intrigue of when I project a low-ranked player to be better, I always am anxious, kind of excited to see, am I right or not?
Absolutely.
And when I look at Ryan Barnes, I don't see a 3-star recruit. Everyone ranked him as a 3-star recruit, and I'm thinking, what am I missing?
Yeah.
That I'm viewing this kid as like a top 100 caliber player, and everybody else is ranking him as like the 30th player in the state of Maryland. It's like,
Sure.
so what am I missing? So we'll first chance to see that. Okay, was I off base here, or was I right about this one?
Yeah.
And so he's stepping into a situation where with him and my number 2 guy, Philip Riley, they've got a chance to battle.
Yes.
And actually, I'll just kind of talk about those two together, Vince. We'll kind of go like in snake order on these.
Oh.
So when I look at Ryan Barnes, there's that aspect of it. But number 2 is he's a freshman stepping in that has an opportunity to play.
Yep.
And there aren't a lot of freshmen that are stepping into situations where they have an immediate opportunity to play. And what I mean by that is every freshman has a chance to play in that if they beat out the guy in front of them. So like Gabriel Rubio, for example, could certainly play, but he's going to have to beat out some really good players to get there. Same with Lorenzo Stiles and Blake Fisher and Rocco Spindler and every other player on the team. But in this situation, because there's so many question marks at the boundary corner position, Barnes and Riley are stepping into a situation where the pathway to starting is much.
It's clear. I mean,
yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And so I'm excited to see that. And at the very least, the hope is that they can provide depth the way that Clarence Lewis stepped up and emerged and took that over last year and sort of forced himself into the 2 deep. And then when Frank Bracey faltered, Clarence Lewis was ready to step into the starting lineup, and he played good football. I mean, for a freshman that didn't have spring, and it was just a weird COVID year, and you had that pause in the middle, and he stepped into some big games and played good football. And Ryan Barnes has got a chance to do that same thing, as does Philip Riley. So I want to see if those 2 guys are ready to compete right now. And if they're not, as a coaching staff, you got to decide, okay, do we want to take a chance that they're going to take that step in the fall, or do we need to start moving some guys around to figure out some other options in the boundary? And that puts you in a little bit of a tougher spot. So that's the other part, the practical aspect of those 2 guys stepping up and emerging, Barnes and Riley, is important. And then the combination of them, if they both have really big springs, and if Cam Hart plays really well this spring, now all of a sudden you have the opportunity to think about Philip Riley playing somewhere else. If they're all playing well, if Philip Riley comes out and this guy's too good not to play, but you know what? So is Ryan Barnes. So do we play them both at the same position, or do we maybe think about finding another home for Philip Riley? Can he play the field? Can he play the nickel? Can he play safety? So those 2 guys to me are the first 2 that I look at and say, I cannot wait to see if they're as good as I think they are. And if they're mentally ready to handle this, if they have made the adjustments to school the way that you need to make those adjustments. Because a lot of times in Notre Dame, that can be a limiting factor for a freshman, in that it's not that your grades aren't good, but it's just like, man, I'm overwhelmed mentally because of all the things I have to do academically. So that's where I'm really excited to see those 2 guys and see what they bring to the table, because there's a lot of talent there. There's a lot of size there. And if they step up, it starts giving you some options to solidify some other positions along the secondary.
Brian, I'm going to stay in the defensive secondary for my second guy. And the reason being, and we talked about this a little bit on our last podcast when we talked about the safeties. I picked Justin Walters. Obviously, he's a true freshman. He's going to be competing for playing time at that safety position. You want to talk about a depth chart that's wide open, it's the safety position. And we broke it down in our last podcast, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. But the bottom line is you've got your 2 starters going into spring in Houston Griffith and Kyle Hamilton, obviously. DJ Brown, I think, is penciled in as, one of the backups. But that other spot in the 2 deep is wide open. And there's a lot of guys competing for it. But this is an opportunity for Justin Walters to jump into that mix. And if you're in the 2 deep at safety, you're going to play. I mean, there's no question, especially in Marcus Freeman's defense. He loves safeties, and he's going to get safeties on the field. So I think that from an opportunity standpoint, Justin Walters has a great opportunity to bust into that 2 deep and get some playing time.
Yeah, no question. And we haven't even talked about the fact that there's a 3rd safety position that Marcus Freeman ideally would like to have that we're just assuming is going to be taken over by a rover or a linebacker at this point in time. So yeah, he's a guy that I I would look for it. And I'm curious to see too with him is he's listed at like 170 plus pounds. He looks bigger than that, but he just plays bigger than that too. And I'm curious to see how he had physically can he hold up, because if he can, I have a feeling he's gonna surprise some people. And I think Justin Walters would have become a much bigger name, Vince, if he would have been allowed to play senior year,
right?
Which he wasn't able to because of the state rule.
Sure,
it had nothing to do with him, or an injury or anything like that. So I think he would have been a guy that would have jumped way up recruiting rankings had he had a chance to do that as a senior.
So since we're going snake order, I guess it's my turn. And my last one I've got Blake Fisher, offensive lineman. From what we're hearing from our sources and from people that are around the program, he stepped up and he's looked really, really good. Not in pads, right? Because they haven't had a chance to be in pads yet.
That was the area I was concerned most about with Blake.
Yeah.
I knew when the pads came on, he'd be good, but what was his conditioning going to be like? What was his work ethic going to be like? Those kind of things. So I mean, you say in most instances, Vince, that in pads thing is like, yeah, okay, we'll believe. But in the case of a kid that was 330 plus pounds when he showed up at Notre Dame, to me, that no pads period was the biggest part for him, because you're going to really find out what kind of work this young man's willing to put in.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's putting in the work. And from everything we're hearing, he's going to be a guy that everybody's going to have their eye on come later on today when they're at practice. And is it ideal to have a true freshman in the 2 deep? Maybe, maybe not. But if he earns it, like Robert Hainsey did, back when he was a true freshman, then I'm all for it. I mean, if he pushes himself into the rotation or into the starting lineup, then fantastic. They're not in a position where they're pushing him to be in the starting rotation because of lack of depth or lack of talent. So this is the perfect opportunity that if he's playing, it's because he earned it. And I think that is a lot of fun. And frankly, look, as a high school football coach, I walk around practice generally, and I dream about them playing for me, as high school seniors. And when you're 330 pounds, you're like, man, I mean, he's going to stick out when he walks out of the locker room, and so eyes are going to go to him regardless. And so my eyes would go to him. And so I'd be keeping my eye on him regardless. But because he's been putting in the work, that just adds to it for me. So he's my third freshman to keep an eye on.
There shouldn't be a single veteran, meaning non-freshman offensive lineman that feels content going into this spring.
Absolutely.
Not one. Because
absolutely,
I mean, he could probably play 4 positions. I think center's probably the only one I wouldn't play him at. But yeah, if you're a veteran offensive lineman at Notre Dame and you're feeling a sense of contentment with practice starting today, you're going to get beat out.
Yeah.
I mean it's as simple as that.
6'6", 330 and a work ethic. That's pretty great stuff.
I think he's hungry. And I think the concern you have is with a kid who just brutalized his opponents the way he did and just dominated the way he did. You always concerned like, okay, this big kid that's just always gotten by on just God-given ability and just like beat up on inferior opponents. Is he going to step on campus kind of like feeling like he's hot stuff and all this? And from everything we've heard about Blake, it's like he stepped on like hungry. Like he's like, okay, red shirt this. You know what I mean? And I'm going to want it. So another freshman that I've heard good things about, which we've reported on recently, is Lorenzo Styles Jr. And that's my third freshman I'm excited to see. And it was hard. I thought about Kane Barong because I'm hearing a lot of great things about Kane Barong. I thought about Blake Fisher. I thought about Gabriel Rubio. There's a lot of freshmen that I look at this spring and said, boy, I'm really looking forward to seeing what he can do. But Lorenzo's a little different. I liked Lorenzo's junior film. I've written about this before. I thought he was a top 200 caliber player for sure based on junior film. But I said, I just feel like there's another gear for him. We saw that gear when he was a senior, and he jumped from that to a top 100, for sure top 100 player in my opinion, and a guy that to me has that big playability that Notre Dame just has lacked. And here's the thing that I love about Lorenzo. He was listed in like 170s in high school. You watch him play corner. He was a mean physical corner. I mean, he would just throw guys around. I mean, he was kind of like Philip. He wasn't as good as Philip Riley at corner, but he had that same mentality. And there was a play in the first game of the year. They were playing their big rival. I think it's Pickerington North. And they put him at tailback. Again, he's like 175 pounds. They put him at tailback, and they run an ISO play on like a short yardage. And there's just this linebacker standing in the hole. So Lorenzo, at 175 pounds, puts his shoulder down and just freaking runs the guy over. And I'm like, Okay, that's a ball player right there. That's a
Right.
ball player right there. I got fired up. I don't get fired up watching high school film. I was like, let's go. Like that's the kind of guy you want. And to have that level of toughness, because he was a very good corner. Ohio State actually offered him as a corner, not as a wide receiver. They wanted him as a corner. And I think speaks volumes about his toughness and that mentality. Sure. He's a guy that I could say, as a freshman, he's the guy that now in this class you have to find a role for. And I think the fact that he's going to get a spring under his belt is going to give him a jump over what Xavier Watts and Jordan Johnson had last year. Xavier Watts was here for the spring, but they canceled after one practice.
Yeah, exactly.
He's a guy that to me is going to be hard to keep off the field because, again, he brings an element, a skill set, a vertical speed, and after the catch ability that they don't have a lot. Even if Jordan Johnson and Xavier Watts get the shot we think they should get and they play and they step up, they're still got not a lot of that explosiveness.
Sure.
But if those guys step up, we'll get into that, and these guys step up, you're now all of a sudden looking at a situation where you've got some really explosive playmakers at receiver, and Jack Cohn's going to be thinking, I am in heaven. Like who'd have thought that my broken foot would have ended with this wonderfulness. Oh, who should I throw to? Michael Mayer, Jordan Johnson, Kevin Austin, Braden Lindsey, Lorenzo Styles, Xavier Watts, Avery Davis. Oh, gee, I don't know who.
Yeah, right.
It's beautiful stuff.